It's week 14 of the fantasy football season, which means it is the final week before those fantasy football playoffs. I'm your host, Jen Piacenti from Sports Illustrated, and joining me today to help you make those tough start-sit decisions for this final week of the regular season is Sports Illustrated's senior fantasy analyst, Michael Fabiano. Fabs, time flies when you're having fun, right? I can't believe it's the end of the regular fantasy football season already.
Yeah, and it's the first ever year where the regular season has gone into week 14, right? I'm still used to 14 through 16 for the playoffs, but it is do or die for a lot of folks out there this week.
It is do or die, and because of that, let's make sure we make the strongest decisions we possibly can. Let's start with the quarterback position.
Yeah, and I'm going to start off with Dak Prescott. How about them Cowboys, right? He had a stinker last week, totally get it, but I'd keep the faith in Dak. Washington has allowed the most fantasy points to quarterbacks, and Dak's been really good against the Washington football team. In fact, over his last 4 games, he has scored at least 20 points in every single one, averaging overall 26.2 points in the last 4 games against Washington. So keep the faith in Dak, and I'd actually keep the faith in Russell Wilson too. Like, I feel like he's starting to wake up a little bit. A couple of weeks ago, he was the QB9. This past week, he would have scored over 20 fantasy points if Gerald Everett could actually catch a football. And now he's got the Texans. Their defense has allowed 5 quarterbacks to score at least 19 fantasy points against them, including Sam Darnold and Trevor Lawrence, who are not really all that good. So Russell Wilson is a borderline QB1. I also like Taysom Hill this week and Cam Newton.
If Russell Wilson can't get right versus the Texans, then I think we just have to write him off for the rest of the season. I agree. I think he's going to have a good game this week. You also like Aaron Rodgers versus the Bears. And interestingly enough, Taysom Hill and Cam Newton still available on a lot of waiver wires. So if you're without Jalen Hurts this week, those are 2 quarterbacks that you could plug in to your lineups on Sunday. Okay, sitting quarterbacks at the position, who are they?
I'm going to go with Ryan Tannehill. And people may be, well, wait a minute. They're playing the Jaguars. It's a home game. The Jaguars just gave it up to Matthew Stafford, but look at the numbers, okay? Their defense has actually allowed an average of just 14.3 fantasy points per game to quarterback since week 10. And remember what they did to Josh Allen, all right? The Bills quarterback, not the Jaguars defender. And Tannehill, even if he has Julio Jones back this week, they are still down A.J. Brown. Tannehill's a fade for me in traditional 1-quarterback leagues. And hey, look, it's Matt Ryan in the sit-em list again. I mean, like, he's forever on this list. He scored 12.1 fantasy points last week, and that was the most points he had scored since week 9. I mean, that tells you all you need to know about Ryan. He's got the Panthers this week. It's not a great matchup. I'm sitting him. I'm also sitting Baker Mayfield. And Derek Carr is almost like a rage sit because I played him last week against Washington, and he did bupkis.
I totally understand that. And we know that when Michael Fabiano brings out the word butkus, beware. So if the guy's name is Ryan, you're sitting him this week. You're also sitting Jared Goff. You aren't chasing the points in that exciting Detroit upset last week. So don't be fooled by Jared Goff. All right, let's run over to the running back position. This is the time of year it gets really tricky. You know, it's deep into the season. Players are starting to get a little bit tired. Maybe some rookies are surging. What do we do here? Feels like there's a lot of question marks at the position.
Yeah, with so many injuries and, you know, teams on a bye, I think you kind of have to roll with the folks who got you here. But Javonte Williams, he's been very good the last couple of weeks. You know, nearly 30 fantasy points last week without Melvin Gordon. Regardless of Gordon's status this week, I'm playing Williams against the Lions. I mean, their defense has given up the 4th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs this season. And, you know, maybe the Broncos are finally going to Williams ahead of Gordon. Time will tell, but Williams, at worst, is a nice RB2. And then Chuba Hubbard's back on top the depth chart there in Carolina with Christian McCaffrey out for the rest of the season. I like the matchup against Atlanta. They've given up the 5th most fantasy points per game to running backs, and a total of 11 have scored over 14 points against them earlier this year. Hubbard scored 14.1 points against Atlanta's defense, so he is a nice RB2 flex. I also like Josh Jacobs, who could see a ton of volume this week, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Yeah, Josh Jacobs was fantastic for me last Sunday. You also like Sony Michel should Darrell Henderson miss another game, and that makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, there's a running back on your sit list this week, Fabs, and I don't like it, but who you got? Go ahead.
And you know what, Jen? This is probably more about DFS because the guys that I have on the sit list, you almost have to play them. And the first guy is Zeke Elliott, and this one breaks my heart because I'm a diehard Cowboys fan. But in his last 4 games, he hasn't averaged more than 3.6 yards per rush. Like, his knee is barking. I wish they'd sit him for a week or two, but it doesn't seem like they're doing that, right? He's also scored fewer than 13 fantasy points in 4 of his last 6 games. Washington has allowed an average of fewer than 50 rushing yards per game to running backs in their last 4. So this is not a good spot for Zeke. I get it. You probably have to play him. Folks, I have to play him. But maybe in DFS, you fade Zeke Elliott. And then James Robinson, right? Much like Zeke, Robinson's banged up, okay? And he's probably going to end up being in a lot of fantasy lineups. I totally get it. But he lost touches to Carlos Hyde last week. The Titans have been tough on running backs lately as well, so you may want to temper your expectations for Robinson and not play him in DFS. Jamal Williams, Mike Davis also on my sit-em list.
All right, let's head over to the wide receiver position. This week, you like Russ, so do you like any of his receivers?
Yeah, I mean, Tyler Lockett has been okay, but DK Metcalf has been a dud. I mean, he has scored 11 or fewer fantasy points in 4 straight games, including 3 games with no more than 7.1. I mean, this is DK Metcalf, for crying out loud. But this is the week, Jen. If he can't do it this week, he's not going to do it. Mm-hmm. The Texans have allowed the most fantasy points to receivers lined out wide this season. I think this is a get-right game for the Seahawks passing game, maybe not the backfield. So start DK Metcalf. I think most people probably would be doing that already, but I want to give people a little assurance. He has been bad lately. This is a great matchup. And then let's talk about T. Higgins, because we don't talk enough about T. Higgins, because all we do is talk about Jamar Chase. Well, over the last month, T. Higgins has been a far superior fantasy wide receiver in the Queen City. I like the matchup this week against the Niners. They have given up 4 touchdowns and the 5th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers since week 10. So T. Higgins should be in your lineup. I have him ranked ahead of Jamar this week. I also like DJ Moore against Atlanta, and Hunter Renfrow, who's become almost a must start this week. He's got the Chiefs.
I love those calls. T. Higgins, just the eye test. You watch that guy play. He's phenomenal. I am not letting another season go by without T. Higgins on one of my teams. I also want to point out that you like Mike Williams this week, and we should all keep our eye on Keenan Allen to see whether or not he clears COVID protocols. But even if Keenan Allen clears, I think Mike Williams is a start, yeah?
Yes.
Versus the Giants?
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
The Giants are a mess.
Yeah, they're totally a mess. All right, as far as sitting, all right, our guy, we love him. Every week we usually start him, but is this finally the week that we should maybe consider not starting Brandon Cooks?
Yeah, you probably do have to play him. I mean, unless you're really deep at wide receiver. But, I mean, his numbers have not been good. He's failed to score more than 11.6 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. He's had single digits in 2 games, which is terrible. And now the Texans are going to play Davis Mills. And that's not good either. And Seattle's defense has allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to receivers lined out wide. So, I mean, you look at Seattle, they just lost Jamal Adams, so that's a benefit for the Texans' offensive skill position players. But still, the matchup is not great, at least on paper. So Brandon Cooks is a fade for me. And then Courtland Sutton. They paid him to maybe have like 4 fantasy points a game. I have no idea what's going on with Courtland Sutton. But I do know this. Since Jerry Jeudy has come back, Courtland Sutton has seen an 11% target share. 11. That's terrible. I can't trust him. And people may want to put him into their lineups because they're playing the Lions. So maybe he's a desperation flex. But folks, that's all he is at this point. Courtland Sutton has not been involved in the Broncos passing game since Jeudy came back from injury. I'm also benching Kenny Golladay and every Giants wide receiver. And then Cole Beasley has disappeared since Dawson Knox returned to the lineup. I would sit him against the Buccaneers.
It is disappointing how they've been using Courtland Sutton. I don't have him on any teams, but I understand that frustration. Like you said, they paid him. So it makes you wonder, are they preparing for next season? The conspiracy theories start. Okay, let's go over to the tight end position. You like a guy who put up a real stinker on Monday night, but we've got to go back to the well here with Dawson Knox, right?
Right, he was bad. I mean, folks, listen, he dropped a few passes. He didn't look good. It was super cold there and windy. I mean, I guess I'm going to give him a pass here. But Dawson Knox is still a top 10 tight end for me, and he's got a good matchup this week against the Buccaneers. Their defense has allowed 10-plus fantasy points to 7 different tight ends this year. And you would think that's going to be a high-scoring game. So I would start Dawson Knox and forgive and forget. And then Cole Kmet, I didn't like him last week, and the numbers were not great. But he has scored 14-plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 4 games. He's the 8th most targeted tight end over the last 5 weeks. And the Packers have allowed 11-plus fantasy points to tight ends 6 times including 4 players who have had 17-plus points against them. So Cole Kmet, regardless of the quarterback, is a nice plug-and-play option. He's not a guy you're starting on a regular basis, but I feel like, Jen, people need help at the tight end position this week, so I want to give them some plug-and-plays. Noah Fant also hasn't been good lately. The matchup's good against the Lions, though, this week. And Evan Engram might be the only Giants pass catcher that I would start. Not that I have a ton of faith in him, but he could be the security blanket for Jake Fromm, and the Chargers have been really bad against tight ends.
Yeah, Cole Kmet still has an 18% target share for the Bears, and you're right. I think this is a week that he should be picked up, he should be used, and he's available on most waiver wires. So if you need a replacement for Dallas Goedert, I think Cole Kmet is your boy there. You could also look at, of course, like Foster Moreau and Tyler Conklin, but I would definitely lean Cole Kmet if I had the choice. All right, as far as sitting tight ends, you're sitting a rookie that a lot of us took as early as the 4th or 5th round.
And folks, I got to play him. You probably have to play him. You probably don't like it because I certainly do not. He's been bad. I mean, he has failed to score double digits in 5 of his last 6 games, including a Week 8 game against this week's opponent, the Panthers, where he scored 3.3 fantasy points. So starting Kyle has been, well, kind of the pits. Yeah, that's a bad joke, but you get the point. If you can avoid him, I would. In DFS, I wouldn't touch him. And then Tyler Higbee. He's been decent this year, right? I mean, his floor is right around 8 or 9 points, and a tight end, that's okay. But I don't like the matchup against the Cardinals. They've only given up 2 touchdowns and the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. So Higbee is a fade for me. So is Jared Cook going up against the Giants. And then Zach Ertz, he's probably a borderline tight end 1 this week, but I don't love the matchup against the Rams.
Fantastic advice, as always. Okay, everybody, pep talk time. This is it. This is the last week. This is what you've been working the whole season for. And you know what? You've got this. When it comes Sunday morning, if you're debating between your players, follow your gut. This is your team. But we will also have all the rankings for you over at si.com/fantasy. Fab's rankings will be there, as well as all of his start sits, si.com/fantasy. But even more importantly, hit that subscribe button right now because you're going to the playoffs. Yes, you are. And we're going to take you all the way to the championship, which means you need the start sit video next week and our waiver wire picks next week and all the way down the stretch. So hit that subscribe button and visit us at si.com/fantasy.